Hello and welcome to the Knit and Grace podcast. Let's update you on my 2023 making plans. Hello and welcome back if you are a returning viewer. If you are new here, my name is Mia and I am the maker behind Knit and Grace. And today I wanted to talk about my 2023 making plans. This is a popular video that usually goes out around this time of year for a lot of podcasters. And I'm definitely, I think I did one of these last year as well. And so I'm definitely just keeping up and showing you how I have come along with my goals for the year this far. I will say that for me, sort of like this time of year, I definitely always tend to think about my goals, as well as, at the beginning and the end of the year. And I think it has to do with that, sort of back to school mentality. It's kind of like the start of a new year, like the second start of the year in a way. And even though I'm very far out of school and I don't have children or, little people in my life that are in school, you definitely feel that energy as Labor Day is coming up. Some folks already have their children back in school. I know like most colleges are already in session. And so, yeah, I think that just that so many years of school and being around people who have children going back to school, it kind of just feels like, like a second start to the year. Not to mention the fact that fall is coming up. We've actually had a very mild summer this year, which is very strange. It's been very rainy, but it's also been very mild. We haven't had many hot days here in New Jersey where I am. We're normally, we have a good chunk of summer that's like we're very much in the 90s. But I don't think we really hit 90s many times this summer so far, which has been really great. And you can already feel fall coming on. The, mornings are darker when I'm waking up. The mornings are crisp when I go out for my morning walk. And I'm just so excited for fall. And so, so now we have to talk about the plans that I made this year and how I am doing against them. So the way I'm going to structure this video is I did have sort of two firm goals of sorts, which we'll talk about. And then I'm going to go through 3 videos. And so I will link them in the cards up above, wherever that shows up. And I will go over those 3 videos that I actually sort of talked about either soft knitting goals or firm knitting goals in terms of specific patterns. And so I will share how I'm doing against that. So in terms of my actual goals for the year, and if I look down, I'm just looking at my podcasting notebook here. But in terms of my goals for the year, initially I had said I wanted to do 2023 grams out of my stash. But, in essence, just more yarn out than I bring in. So that was the first one. And then the second one was to only purchase yarn for upcoming projects and not add to my stash. So I said that I could purchase yarn as long as it was a project that was going to be knit up, pretty like right away. But I didn't want to add yarn to my stash. So if you have been watching for any amount of time, you know that I may not be hitting these goals. But, this summer I kind of, back in June, I want to say, I kind of did have a little bit of an epiphany moment. I had been buying a lot, doing a little bit of retail therapy, and I said, no more. No mas, no more yarn until Rhinebeck. And so far, so good. I've actually stuck to that plan. With the exception of one purchase. There was one exception, which was a test knit that I knew I had signed up for and I needed to buy the yarn for. But there was one other thing that I actually did buy yarn for, but I immediately knitted up. So it was just a net zero. And if you've watched my last podcast, that's the ranunculus. So I've really been able to stick to that goal. And I think what I'm going to do now for the rest of the year is kind of work in this way where I'm setting up little quarterly goals for myself. As I'm mulling through what I want to do in 2024, because I think that in 2024, I'm going to do a complete no buy, and I'll explain all of that and why later on in the year. But in terms of this year's goals, I definitely have added to stash. I've definitely fallen prey to, just the wonderful indie yarn dyers and, stockists and things and that I just absolutely love. And I have definitely added to my stash. So if you haven't caught my last video, I will just go through my year-to-date numbers from my last video. I have made some more progress this month, although not as much because I am primarily working on a sample this month. But so far for the year, I have brought in 7,739 grams of yarn, which equals 28,338 yards. And then I have either used up, gifted, or destashed. That's what I'm counting as the out. And that is 5,436 grams. And that equals 19,265 yards. And so my net is that I have actually increased my stash by 2,303 grams or 9,074 yards. So, yeah. Obviously, my stash has grown instead of decreased. And, kind of wanted to think through some of this. I think that I wouldn't say that my goals were aggressive. Because I wasn't saying that I couldn't buy yarn at all. I was just saying that I didn't want to add to stash. So I wanted to make sure that the yarn that I was buying responsibly and I was using it up for projects. So, looking back on this, I think that was a really good intention. I think, I did really do really well for a very long time there at the beginning of the year. And then we had some family events and some things going on, and definitely like that kind of like retail therapy bug kind of like kicked in a little bit. And I actually went a little crazy in May and June, buying a lot of yarn. And yeah, I mean, it is what it is, we deal with things in our lives in different ways. But I think overall, my yarn buying has been a lot more conscious. So that is one really good thing that has come out of this. I have definitely been much more conscientious about the yarn that I'm buying and recognizing, okay, is this yarn that I'm going to use up right away, which I have had quite a bit of that yarn, or those purchases. Or is this yarn that's filling another need? And if it is, I kind of worked through it. I was like, am I still going to buy this? Am I still going to give in to my impulse to buy it? And that's totally fine, right? So I think that overall, my yarn buying this year has been much more conscientious. I haven't been as much of the, going after the next new thing. And overall, my yarn buying has been a lot less than in previous years. Which I know sounds a little crazy when you hear those numbers. But I'm also someone who knits quite a lot and quite speedily. And I have quite a bit of disposable income to burn through. That's just the reality of it. And I choose to buy things like yarn instead of, doing other things. Like I definitely sacrifice in other areas of my life to make sure that I can buy my yarn. So like, I tend to like do my own hair and I do my own nails and pedicures and things like that. So it's not like I'm just willy-nilly just buying yarn. I mean, not that I have to make any excuses for my yarn purchases anyway, but this is sort of like in general, my yarn purchases, although they may not necessarily always seem as conscientious, I do make sacrifices in other areas of my life so that I can sort of indulge in this hobby of mine that I really enjoy. So I think overall, even though I am behind, I definitely have not added as much yarn to my stash as I have in years past. And I've definitely been much more conscientious about the yarn that I'm bringing into my home. So now we're going to talk about the sort of 3 soft goals of videos that I put out there this year with the intention of using up some of my yarn. So the first video that I put out was at the beginning of the year, which was my goals video. And in that video, I actually went through my stash, specifically my sweaters quantity stash, and I came up with 10 sweater patterns that I knew would fit the yarn that I had in my stash. And then, I did this as an exercise to look at my stash, especially the sweaters quantity worth, and then B, sort of come up with viable options for that stash. I think some of these will still be made. Whether or not they're made with the yarn that was intended to be made is a different story. But I definitely enjoyed that exercise, and it definitely gave me a lot of ideas with how to use up some of the yarns in my stash, because I think that the way that I tend to acquire yarn is when I do want to purchase yarn, or I get the itch, or, someone puts out a really good shop update that I want to, sort of support, is I do one of 2 things. I either buy like single skeins, so for socks, or I buy sweater quantities. There's no like in between. I either buy sweater quantities or I buy single skeins. And unless I have an actual project in mind, at which point, I actually buy the yarn that I need for that project. So I do amass a large amount of sweater quantities worth of yarn in my stash, especially because I do support a lot of like sort of more natural dyers, or dyers that dye in like small batches that are like one of a kind, so you can never get it again. So if you really like a color, you kind of want to get a sweater's quantities worth just in case you don't know, like if you don't know what you want to make, so that you do have enough yarn when you actually do decide to knit it up. And that's kind of my thought process of how I acquire yarn. And that's why I came up with this video. So I'm going to go over the 10 sweaters that I highlighted in that video and whether or not I plan on still making them or if I have made them. So the first sweater that I highlighted in that video was the Ava pullover by Melody Hoffman, and this is a sweater that I have actually completed. And so this sweater I actually had purchased yarn into my stash to make this sweater, and I just hadn't gotten around to making the sweater, and that was Woolen Twine Fiber Studios, their 5th limited edition, which was a DK weight, I forget the the blend, but it was a DK weight limited edition yarn of Eula's, and I had specifically purchased the yarn to make the Ava pullover by Melody Hoffman, and I have completed it, and I will insert a picture of it here. I still haven't taken my FO pictures worn, so that is coming soon, hopefully, but that was the first one that I highlighted in that video. The next sweater that I highlighted in that video is the Saglin pullover by Albina McLaughlin, and I had intended to use some Nutiden in my stash for this particular sweater, and I do still intend to knit the sweater. I'm not sure if I'm going to use that specific color of Nutiden. I have another color of Nutiden now that I think I might use instead, but I do still have plans of making the sweater because I love my current version, which I will insert a picture of here. And I just get so many compliments on it, and it's just so cozy. And yeah, I actually, as I'm thinking about it, I'm like getting the feeling that I need to cast it on soon. So maybe that might be my Rhinebeck knitting project. We shall see. Then the next pattern that I highlighted was the Carbeth by Kate Davies. And so this one I didn't have yarn in my stash for at the time. I do actually potentially have yarn in my stash to make this one now. And this one was just more so of one that I love my current version of the Carbeth. I made it in Lion Brand, which of their yarns. I forget which of their yarns I made, but I made it in Lion Brand. It knit up so quickly. It's just a really bulky weight gauge. And I wanted to make it in a lighter 100% wool. And so I do still have plans on making it because it is another just super cozy sweater. And if you see the pictures of both my Saglin and my my Carbeth, you can see I love really big turtlenecks in the winter because my neck gets cold, and so I just like to kind of turtle myself into my sweaters, especially if I'm working in an office environment or in my home office. It actually gets very cold in the winter, so I just love to have something to just like turtle my neck into. So the next sweater that I highlighted in that video was the Wild Posy by Melody Hoffman, and this is a sweater that I have already made, and I actually have yarn in my stash for, and so that is why I highlighted this one, and I do still want to make another version of it. So the version that I made previously was made in Plotilopi, and I lengthened the body by quite a bit. And so my next version, I do want to make a cropped version that I can wear in the fall and spring with my linen dresses and like tights and, you know, my booties and things like that. So it's definitely still on the plans, or, you know, sort of in the pipeline to make one. When that'll happen, I don't know, but this is definitely a pattern that I do want to repeat. Then the next one is the Miles shirt jacket. Well, the Miles shirt jacket by Haley Smedley of Ozetta. And so this is one that I had purchased yarn for late last year to make this shirt jacket. And I was hoping to make it in the late winter for the spring. And that just didn't happen. I forget why. But I actually have my gauge swatch and everything. I have the yarn, and it's definitely still in my queue, and one that I hopefully will be knitting up soon. Then the next one that I have is the Oxa, and this is by Caitlin Hunter. And this one is a pattern that I specifically bought yarn for at last year's Rhinebeck, so 2022. And it is another pattern that will definitely be knit up eventually. It's gonna happen. It's just gonna happen, but who knows? I have to stop. I need to really revisit some of these older patterns, and that's where I think my sort of no-buy plans of 2024 will come in, because I really do need to knit some of these patterns. And they're patterns that I really want to knit, and you just kind of get into that like next best thing, like that new pattern, like new feeling. So definitely one that I will be knitting again, or not knitting again, but knitting. Then the next one I have is the Cinnamon Mum pullover by Tati Lutsak, and another one that I had purchased yarn for at Rhinebeck, and I 100% intend on still knitting, hopefully in the winter this year. It's a really good winter color, so maybe that'll be my Christmas sweater this year, but another one that I'm looking forward to knitting. Then we have the Piazza Tee by Sari Nordland. And so this one is one that I chose based on some yarn that I had in my stash. I do still intend on knitting the pattern. I actually did purchase the pattern, so it's in my library. But I don't think that I'm going to use the yarn that I originally intended on using. So this is one that is going to sort of be put to the back burner until I can figure out what yarn I actually want to use to knit that pattern. Then next up we have the Ilha by Orlane Suchi, and this is another lovely pattern that I chose based on yarn that I already have in my stash. And I totally do actually still intend on making this pattern, and I can see the yarn out of the corner of my eye as I'm filming this video. It is leftover yarn from a woolly, not a woolly knit cone, from a Holst super soft cone that I used for the first cardigan test. So definitely still on the queue to be knit up, and yeah, so it's definitely a lighter sweater, so this might be one that I will now knit in the late winter this year for next year's spring. And then lastly, we have the Gentle Lopi by Melody Hoffman, which is a pattern that I actually did knit. And so this one was, I chose this one because I had some darker Plötulopi in my stash that I wanted to get out of my stash. It had been in my stash for quite a bit. I think that the color wasn't the exact color that I had been hoping for when I purchased it. And so what I ended up using or doing was I marled it with a lighter color of Plötulopi, and I made the Gentle Lopi tunic, and I absolutely love it. I wore it to death in the spring when we were up at my sister's house, and I'm really looking forward to wearing it again this fall as we start going on hikes and things like that. This is a really great one that is just like a good layering piece, especially in the spring and in the fall, when you don't want to wear a coat, but you want a breathable layer that's going to keep you really warm and not heavy. So I actually specifically knit this to be a hiking sweater. And so I'm really excited to get back out in the fall and with the sweater and do a little hiking and enjoy the sweater. So the next video that I want to highlight is the 3 things you need to knit this spring video. And in this video, I covered 3 categories of items that I thought were just perfect or necessary, in my opinion, for your spring wardrobe. I highlighted, I believe it was 15 patterns, so 5 in each category. But I did mention one specific pattern within each category that I was planning on knitting up. And this is my greatest success. I have finished all of the patterns highlighted in that video. So the first one I won't go into too much detail about because I just covered it in the last section, and that was my Ava pullover by Melody Hoffman. So I highlighted this one as a necessary item in the spring, a lightweight pullover that's going to keep you, warm in the transitional weather, but is still sort of at a nice looser or like a fingering or a DK weight gauge, so that you can still have a lot of breathability, when it does get warmer. So it's just a nice layering piece, and I did finish it. And I think that was kind of part of my intention for that video. I was like, I need to finish something on this list of mine, so let's go ahead and do that. And so that's actually what I did. So the next pattern that I highlighted in that video was the Building Blocks Drop by Amy Scher, and I did complete it. So for that video, I believe I had completed my first one already, and then I was making a second one. And so I actually made 2 slipovers from Amy's Building Block Drop pattern, and with slightly different versions. So the first variation I made in Knitand, which is an unspun yarn, and I did a folded over collar, I did a straight hemline, and sort of like regular hip length, so a little bit of a longer length. Then for my second version, I just did a regular ribbed collar or neckband. I didn't fold it over. I did the high-low hem for the slip over, and I actually cropped it. So that one is cropped and meant to be worn over my dresses with like a t-shirt underneath. And so I successfully finished both of those. And then the last pattern that I highlighted in that video was the Straya cardigan by Andrea Mowry, and I have recently finished this one and featured it in my July podcast, I want to say. And yeah, I absolutely loved knitting this. This one was knit completely from stash. It was a stash buster. I had a woolly knit cone in stash, and then I had a bunch of linen quill left over from my Vertices Unite, which was last year's Rhinebeck project. And what to say about that? Yeah, I finished it. I love it. I am so excited to wear it. Unfortunately, I finished it in the summer, so I wasn't able to wear it in the spring, but I'll be able to wear it now in the fall. And I think that the colors are just perfect to pair with all types of colors, whether it's, browns, the browns that I tend to wear in the fall, or the blues that I tend to wear in the spring. And then lastly, I will bring you up to speed on my summer knitting plans. I believe this was part of my July podcast toward the end, but I will again link the video up above so that you can see what video that was part of. But in this video, I specifically highlighted my summer making plans, and for my summer making plans, I had planned to make 3 summer tops and 3 fall tops, because as we all know, if you want a sweater for the fall, you actually have to start in July. You can't just, magically expect a sweater to appear once the fall hits. You could. If you're a really fast knitter and have tons of time on your hand, I guess you could knit up a sweater in a week. I have definitely done that. But, I want it to be a lot more logical and realistic about my goals. And so I had set 3 summer tops and 3 sweaters that I plan on making. So this one is still in progress because technically I gave myself all the way through October to knit these. So some of them will still happen, some of them won't, and we will go over that now. One of the items that I featured in that video that was not sweater related, and it just happened to be a test knit, was a cowl that I was test knitting for Isolde, and that I did finish it. I cannot show it to you. It's still a secret test knit, and hopefully I'll be able to share that with you early this fall. So I was able to complete that. The first summer top that I highlighted was the ranunculus, and so I'd originally planned on knitting mine with some yarn that I picked up at Maryland Sheep and Wool, which was the Kelborn Woolen, I forget the yarn line, but it's, Mojave. It's like their linen cotton blend. It's really beautiful yarn. I did start it in that yarn. Didn't love how it was turning out. Completely frogged it. Then I was at Joann one day filming a video. I picked up some yarn and I knit that one up in 2 days. So I did actually finish that top. Then I had actually highlighted the Avani by Kadri. And so this is one that she'd put out a test knit for in June, I want to say. And I did sign up for the test knit and I did plan on knitting it whether or not I got chosen for the test knit, which I didn't. But then a couple weeks later, Rohi of Knit Rohi put out a test knit for the Tangent top, which is a very, well, not very similar. It's actually not very similar because the Avani is a V-neck, but it is a mock neck. It is a summer top, so a sleeveless top. And so essentially I swapped out my patterns. So instead of knitting Avani, I planned on knitting the Tangent top, and I did. That was a test knit. I completed it, and the pattern's out now if you want to purchase it. And then my third summer top that I plan on making was the Tenya by Caitlin Hunter. And I plan on using some woolly knit cones for this one. So I got some of their cotton cones when they did the summer cone along with Rebecca of the Crayabea. And so I thought that that would be a perfect use of one of the colors that I got. And I've actually scratched my plans. I'm not going to make the Tenya. I am going to make it again in the future, but I'm kind of done with summer knitting. So I'm just like over summer knitting. I think part of it is too that I'm actually sample knitting a summer garment. So if you are a sample knitter, you might know this, but as sample knitters, I'm always knitting like 2 seasons ahead. So I'm actually knitting or not 2 seasons, but like a year ahead essentially. So right now this summer, I am knitting for spring summer collection of 2024. The same thing in the winter of, like in February, I was knitting for winter collection of this year. So like, it's always like looking forward. So I'm actually knitting a summer yarn right now. And I was just kind of like out. I was like done with the summer yarn. So unfortunately, Tanya will not be completed this summer. So I have completed 2 of my 3 summer tops for the year. Although I did make other summer tops, but that was before I had set out these plans. So next up we have my 3 fall sweaters, and this has to do partly with my Rhinebeck plans as well as with a test knit that I signed up for. So the first sweater that I highlighted was the Tuku by the Petite Knitter, Weechen of the Petite Knitter. And this one's almost done. So definitely going to be a success. Then the second one that I highlighted was the Tendril by Sophie of the Knit Pearl Girl. And this is in testing, and it is a test knit. And because of that, it is also going to be finished. But that one's not due until October. So the Tendril shall be, not the Tendril, the Tuku should be done shortly. And the Tendril will probably be done some point in September. And then the third sweater that I highlighted with regard to my fall making plans was the Fernwood by Tanya Barley. And I still plan on making this sweater. I have the yarn for the sweater. I bought yarn specifically for the sweater, and it's a very specific amount, so I kind of have to make this sweater. Not have to, but it's for the sweater. But I got inspired and I have decided I'm going to make a different sweater for my third fall sweater. And rather than be over ambitious and say I'm going to make 4 small fall sweaters, I'm just going to tone it back and just say, unfortunately, we're going to put the Fernwood to the back burner, make this other sweater, and if the Fernwood works out, then it works out. But I don't want to hold myself to making 4 fall sweaters because, definitely something I would do. Definitely very overambitious energy over here usually when it comes to my knitting, but I wanted to be a little bit more realistic. So that one is going to be stay in the queue for a little bit longer, and instead I'm going to make the Heirloom Quilt Cardigan by Katrin Seeberger. And this is the cardigan that has taken the knitting Instagram world by storm this summer, and it is absolutely gorgeous cardigan. It's made up of individual blocks that are seamed together, and then you pick up for the sleeves and you pick up the collar and the hemline. And I've actually started a few squares, so this one is also going to happen, and it is my official Rhinebeck sweater for the year. So that is the sweater that I'm going to wear to Rhinebeck, and I have a whole outfit, and the same way as I did last year, I will have an outfit making video to share with you all for Rhinebeck weekend before you guys see my Rhinebeck vlog. And yeah, so that is everything that I had to share with you guys. How are you doing on your knitting goals? I've definitely learned a lot this year. I think my goals were pretty aggressive. As I just mentioned, I like to set pretty aggressive goals, but definitely still doable. I think some things happened that were kind of like out of my sort of circumstances. But I think just in general, it's made me much more conscious about my yarn buying, and which was really the primary goal behind a lot of this, was just making sure that I was buying with intentionality, which I have been. So let me know if you set any knitting goals for the year, or stash goals, or whatever it might be, and how you're working toward them. And I will leave you here. If you like the video, please do all the things, like, subscribe, click the bell icon so you're notified every time I post a video. Definitely helps my channel out and make sure that others can see my content. And I will see you in the next one. Bye.